Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land. I hope that life is tickety-boo for you and everything is bumps-a-daisy. What we're going to do in this video is take a look at 10 classic literature one-hit wonders. And by one-hit wonders we mean classic authors who have only written one novel, would you believe it? So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? First up, and in no particular order of our classic one-hit wonders, is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. Now this book comes in at around 600 to 700 pages and is a labyrinthine, sprawling novel which covers the dates from 1905 revolution in Russia all the way up to World War II. It's complex because it's got so many characters, and often they've got very unusual relationships to each other that you wouldn't expect, and they come out of nowhere. But most of all, what makes this work hideous in some respects to try and get your head around is that in Russian there are often more than one name for a person. And Pasternak doesn't disappoint in that he will start a sentence using one of the names of the character and then switch to another of their names. And if three names wasn't enough, he also thinks it's quite good to throw in nicknames as well. It's the proverbial haywire. One of the things that this book spawned was the epic film bearing the same name, which must have given birth to depression for several generations of people. Now, the work by Boris Pasternak was ill received in the Soviet Union as it was critical of the Soviet regime and what it stood for. However, if they had been smart, they would have got the book published worldwide and finished off the Western powers while they were distracted in trying to work out who was related to who. Second on our list is The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Now this book was received with critical acclaim very quickly after coming out and became almost an instant 20th century classic piece of literature. In fact, Time magazine classed it in the top 100 most important novels in the English language between the years 1920 and 2005. Now I haven't read it, but apparently it's a great shame that Ralph Ellison only wrote this one novel. He was working on a second novel, which his notes and writing had gone to thousands of pages when his house caught fire and he lost a lot. No such thing as backing up onto hard drive back then, I suppose. And so he enters the rarefied air of authors who only have one novel to their name, and that novel was a humdinger. Number 3. The authoress was Anna Sewell. So do you know the book? That's it. Black Beauty. Da, 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 da. At least I think that's the tune. It's not the Lloyd's Bank advert, is it? No, that's Black Beauty. I think. Anyway, Black Beauty, of course, is a children's classic, beloved of children. However, if you didn't read it as a child, it does not mean you shouldn't read it now, because it is an exquisite piece of work. It's told from the first-person point of view of Black Beauty, the horse, describing growing up as a foal on an English country farm, then working as a horse, drawing the cabs in London, and then a nice retirement in the countryside. This book shone a light on animal cruelty as the horses speak with one another and describe the difficulties they have with various equipment that is used with them and how they're maltreated. But there's a moral lesson in practically every chapter, not just about horses, of course, but also about how people interact with each other, and that's why it's so good for children to read. Nevertheless, an absolutely brilliant book if you haven't read it already. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. That's number 4 that we're talking about. You may have noticed that these authors we're talking about have written poetry or novellas in their time, but only one fully fledged novel. And The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath is her masterpiece. It follows in the steps of Esther Greenwood, who goes and gets an internship at a magazine, a prestigious magazine in New York, which leaves her a bit cold really, because it's supposed to be the thing that all girls aspire to, but not for her. She meets interesting characters. She appreciates the good girl who's called a Pollyanna by others. She appreciates the humour of others of her friends, but she becomes scared, terrified, bewildered in the world that she's in, and we begin to see a descent into the darkness that is mental health. Sadly, of course, I think it was only about a month after this book was published and released that Sylvia Plath actually took her own life because of mental illness, which makes the message all the more poignant when you consider how this book ends. So we're at number 5 already. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Of course, Oscar Wilde was a wit, and if you've read any of his plays, especially I'm thinking The Importance of Being Earnest, this does not disappoint. We have Dorian, who wants to never grow old and instead has a picture which grows old on his behalf. But in this book, we find various different ideas that Oscar Wilde seems to be struggling with and analysing. I particularly think he's got his own eye quizzically working over the long-held beliefs he had in aesthetics, as he was clearly a lover of fine things and of beauty. However, it does make you wonder what he was privately thinking when you consider how Dorian's character works out. Now, if you want to see possibly the best summation of this book in all its glory, I recommend you go and watch my Classics Under 3 Minutes series of The Picture of Dorian Gray, and it's under 3 minutes. You'll get a real sense of what this book is about. Let me know what you think. By the way, apparently it's important that halfway through a video like this, I stop and say to you, if you love classics and you like exploring the classics in depth, then please subscribe and dingling the bell so that you don't miss out on any of the videos that I release, which really dig deep inside classic literature. Anyway, back to our list. Number 6 is by the authoress Margaret Mitchell and is that epic Gone with the Wind. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. I know that's not how Clark Gable did it, but you know, I wasn't there to teach him. Gone with the Wind is a massive 1,000-page book, which means if you've got a dead body to weight down in a river, you could use this after reading it. It follows, of course, Scarlett O'Hara, the daughter of a plantation owner in the south of America before the Civil War began, and she's a precocious and spoilt girl, a spoilt child, and this recounts her story of how she tries to get out of poverty after General Sherman has come through Atlanta at the end of the Civil War with his scorched earth policy on his march toward the sea. Of course, he left Atlanta burning behind him in ruins. And so Scarlett O'Hara has to suck up her pride and get to work in getting back on her feet and being able to live once more. This is a work I haven't read myself, mainly because of the film. I was forced to watch the film when I was about 10, and ever since I've had a spellbinding fear of the words "Gone with the Wind." I'm surprised that between it and Dr. Zhivago, it didn't put an end to the Hollywood experience altogether. Our 7th is easy to forget that this is a one-hit wonder. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So often we say the Brontes that we sometimes forget that Emily only wrote one book. And fair play to her, because it's gone down as a classic work of Gothic literature. The famous couple, Cathy and Heathcliff, this book was is a bit shocking in its day. It challenged Victorian morals, it challenged the religious practices of the day or the religious characters within the church of the day, and it also depicts cruelty, both physical and mental. And so it was quite ahead of its time. It weighs in at somewhere about 300 pages and is one of my 12 books I absolutely guarantee I will read this year. As I've said before in another video, I have read this book, but can't for the life of me remember how it works out. All I remember is constantly shouting at the pages and slapping my forehead. Not like this. That would be strange. Like this. Oh. At number 8 is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Now, this was written for adults, but has become beloved by adolescents and is found across the world in many, many school curriculums. A lot of that will be due to the fact that it explains so neatly the angst and the sense of alienation, and the way that a youth who's on the brink of being an adult sees the hypocrisy and the superficiality of the world that they're entering into. It covers various themes. It involves things like loss and sense of self and isolation and depression, and is so highly esteemed that I was quite surprised when researching this video that The Catcher in the Rye sells approximately 1 million copies every year. I mean, that's brilliant. It's got to be worth looking into just from that statistic, because one of the things I believe that makes a classic is it has so enduring a message to tell that it never stops telling its story. So generation after generation will continue to buy it because it resonates with them. That's one of the things that's a giveaway to a book that has a universal theme. In ninth is the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket by Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, Edgar Allan Poe did a few short stories, more renowned for his poetry, specifically The Raven, but this was his only novel. And it follows Mr. Pym starting with a shipwreck of his own little boat, going through various other travels on other boats throughout the seas, and it covers things like storms and shipwreck and mutiny and cannibalism, and even a trip to the South Pole, which has a remarkably mild climate. So not a place I think Mr. Poe ever visited himself. The book itself, when trying to be classified by those sober characters with protruding foreheads and pale skin from never seeing the light of day because they're always trapped in the library, they apparently can't quite pin down where this book's meant to land. It's a mixture of everything, apparently. An adventure, a narrative, blatant plagiarism, and a travel log. So, like a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's works, if you're not accustomed to him, all over the place. I do beg your pardon, my American cousins. I swear it's nothing personal. I just don't get on with him. And in number 10, it is In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. Now, I know what some may be thinking. Didn't he write 7 books? Well, actually, no. There are 7 volumes to the single work In Search of Lost Time. And as you would imagine, at 7 volumes, it is a whopper, a behemoth, a gargantuan colossal of a thing standing astride all of the books. Proust has been called the best author of the 20th century, and this book chronicles basically his life from a little boy, starting with the famous Madeleine scene, all the way to his adulthood. I believe he had finished his original book, if I've got my dates correct, at about 1909, or maybe a bit later. But anyway, he kept on adding to it all the way up to 1922. And so it's no surprise that In Search of Lost Time is 4,000 pages long. So if you need to take something on holiday to sort of pass the time of day with, and that holiday happens to be an around-the-world cruise, then Proust is your man. I hope you found this little video as diverting as I did in making it. I am not proclaiming that I have read all of the books, I've read some of them, but it was just a thought that came to me. I wonder if there are one-hit wonders in the literature world. And lo and behold, there were. And that's them. And there are a couple of others, but not many more that I could find, without diving down into the Hades of storytelling of all time and finding some really obscure people who we've never heard of and whose works are probably not classics anyway. So like I say, if you like classic literature and you like to see in-depth book reviews, then subscribe to my channel and ring the bell, and have a look around on my library of videos to see what tickles your fancy. And please leave a comment about this video. Which books have you read? Are there any you would recommend for me to read and for others who have watched this to read also, which you really think are a bit of all right and very much worth the trouble to go through? I wish you joy in your reading.